Jon, we've checked in with you periodically on what's going on, particularly with the tech startups in Israel. Obviously, the big story there is the continuing tragedy in and around Gaza, but there is an economic aspect to this, particularly with respect to tech startups, which are so important to Israel. Give us a sense right now of the play with the startups in the tech area in Israel as this war drags on.
Well, we're now 3 months into the war, and what we predicted would happen has happened, which is the initial reaction is that markets are afraid when we go to war, the shekel and the stock market drops. But I think I was actually with you, David, just a few months ago at the beginning of the war, and I predicted that we would have a very fast recovery, and that is what has happened. Turns out that the shekel is now, fully back to where it was, actually better than where it was before. The stock market has made up all of its losses, and the startups themselves are really using a lot of grit to be resilient, and that means to make sure that they can deliver. There's been a slogan here: Israel Tech delivers no matter what. And people are working very hard, and the startup community, I think, is weathering the storm well.
Give us a sense of that storm and no matter what's involved in that, because I saw there was a report out of a Startup Nation that said actually tech startup money had really gone down year over year. So what's being done to supply that money?
It's gone down, David, all over the world. If you look at what's happened to tech funding, both in the U.S. and in Europe and in Asia, it's down over the last 2 years from the peaks of 21. In some cases, 70 and 80%, and Israel is very much in the same league. Now we have a separate issue, which of course is the war, which is never really a good thing for investment and for investors. But it turns out that the startup community in Israel in 23 ended up still raising $7 billion. Now that was down from about 15 billion the year before, and down again from 21, where it was 25 billion. So it's a significant drop, but it's more or less in line with the global trends. And now the question is, what are we going to do as we come out of the war, God willing? And are these startups going to join in the overall recovery, which I foresee going to affect the global venture market?
And an important aspect of this, as you and I have talked about before, is the so-called runway for the startups. How far out can they go? There's some concern that that runway has now gotten extended to some extent because of the war in part. And talk to us about the resilience fund that you've been involved in putting together to try to help with that problem.
Well, as soon as the war broke out, we decided that we had to take action and to raise a special fund that would enable companies to extend their runway, right? In other words, startup companies, by and large, are not profitable. They need investment in order to get to their goals. And the problem, of course, is that in a war, it's not always the easiest time to get this investment. So we created a vehicle. We announced it about 2 months ago. And literally in these 2 months, we've managed to get to our first closing. We're now at $15 million of commitments. But more importantly, we've made actually 18 different investments in companies, where we're choosing companies that have been affected by the war because they have team members who are in the service, they are on border zones like in the north or the south, or that they somehow are providing critical technology for the war effort. So these 18 companies have been very carefully selected. We've done the diligence. They run through our investment committee, and we act as sort of a catalyst to bring additional money from both investors alongside of us, both inside the company and new investors, as well as the government, who is providing matching funds.
We'll talk about the government program specifically. I mean, the numbers I've seen are something like 18% of the Israeli economy is accounted for by some of the tech startups you've done. What is the Israeli government doing to help you in this effort?
They're taking significant steps, and they created a program called First Aid, which is about 400 million shekels, or a little over $100 million. And that's just the first drop. My sense is that will grow several times. But again, it's all sort of like this snowball effect, where you create a core and then you add on. So with our 15 million, we estimate that we have actually unlocked more like $100 million of very critical funding because we're standing up and saying we're going to lead this investment or join it at a critical juncture right now. And there's no reason to wait, because it turns out that in these crises, it's a good time to invest. Prices are down. The companies that are truly resilient and get through this turn out to be very big companies. We saw that in 2000. We saw that in 2008 when companies like Google or Airbnb or Uber, these were all built in times of crisis. And we expect that there'll be amazing Israeli tech companies coming through this war. I'm sure that there are actually companies being created right now in the few minutes that many of our soldiers are having to think as they're in the service. And I'm quite optimistic about the rest of the decade here in the Israeli tech ecosystem.
Jon, on the private side, where is the investment coming from? There's a lot of coverage, obviously, about what's going on with Israel and its relations with the rest of the world. The United States has been pretty steadfast, although there's some pressure coming to bear. There's a lot of talk about particularly the so-called global south, not a term I love to use, but global south really being increasingly hostile to Israel. Are you getting investment from outside of Israel and outside of Israel in the United States?
Well, first of all, at OurCrowd, which is my organization, we're a global digital investment platform. And we're managing about $2.5 billion of assets. I hope over the next 4 or 5 years we'll grow it to $20 billion. We'll have to check back and see how we do. But at the moment, about 95% of our funding comes from outside of Israel. And that's in line with the overall Israeli tech ecosystem. As much as 80% of the money that comes into Israeli startups comes from outside of the country. And it's actually, while very much driven by the US, which of course is the world's leading venture capital market, both in terms of startups, funds, as well as LPs, limited partners, who are making these investments. We're seeing investments coming in from Europe, from Asia, from Oceania, from South America. Literally, it's quite a global investment moment for us. And we're seeing people who are actually saying, you know what, this is the time. I want to take a stand. Now, it probably helps that our resilience fund is fee-free and carry-free, no management fee and no carried interest, which is highly unusual, I would say unprecedented in the world of venture capital. And the reason we're doing it is we're a big organization. We can afford to manage this intelligently and give investors who are taking that step to support Israeli startups at this critical juncture a particularly good deal.